the relationship between the use of artificial intelligence and human rights. Now, this relationship is really not unequivocal. It's both positive, and at the same time, it raises a number of serious issues on the impact of artificial intelligence on human rights. Now, artificial intelligence, of course, is used already in many fields that contribute to the betterment of human rights implementation. For example, it's widely used in the health sector, thereby improving access to the right to health. It's widely used by the legal companies to process big data, the large numbers, large quantities of information. It's also increasingly used in courts. Now, the difficulty with AI is that it's somewhat everywhere, but at the same time nowhere, because we don't see it. Sometimes if we talk to chatbot, we know that artificial intelligence or some sort of technologies are being used, but also there is a danger that sometimes we don't really know that artificial intelligence is used. And this is one of the specific features of it. So we can say that it's everywhere, but at the same time nowhere, because we cannot see it. Now, apart from all the positive impacts of use of artificial intelligence in the human rights field, which will be, I'm sure, discussed today, of course, we are raising the issue of AI and human rights as a topic for the conference like this, because we are more concerned of, let's say, not so positive consequences of using the artificial intelligence in the field of human rights, and the impact, not always very positive impact, that artificial intelligence has on human rights. And in different discussions that I participate on this topic, very frequently you see that this relationship between artificial intelligence and human rights, if we look from the perspective of concern, not from the positive perspective, it's very frequently is narrowed down just to, let's say, privacy concerns, protection of data issues. But we have to really understand that it's much broader impact than just on privacy and protection of data issues. For instance, one of the major issues that has been on the agenda in the public on the use of artificial intelligence and its negative impact on human rights was because of the fact that several states are using artificial intelligence in decision making, for instance, in the social security systems, which in some occasions has caused not only bias against certain groups of society and even their discrimination, but as we have heard also last year, even the resignation of government, some of the governments in Europe, for namely the negative consequences on the use of AI in the systems. There is, for the time being, no technical solution available to ensure that discriminatory bias are eliminated in AI. So we really have to be very careful how and where we use it and how we regulate it. The law enforcement field, for instance, has also been criticized quite a lot recently for using certain technologies in law enforcement, in detecting crimes and collecting evidences, for instance, with distance face recognition systems that sometimes have led to erroneous convictions and the like. So there are really a number of concrete examples where we see certain not so positive impacts on AI. Now, what I wanted to emphasize in this intro to the conference and really extensive topics that will be discussed, firstly, that as a lawyer, but not only, I believe that AI should be regulated. And indeed, there are various efforts to do that within the European Union, within the Council of Europe, but also in separate states like Canada and others. But what strikes me really that despite the fact that AI is actually a global issue. It's not something that is just within the national borders. It overpasses the national borders. But if we look at the regulation and all those efforts to regulate AI, then we see that there is really no global efforts. There are really fragmentized efforts in different regions. Now, at the same time, we cannot really say that AI is not regulated. It is. But at the same time, there are important gaps in this regulation that need to be addressed. Now, this regulation also, and the proposals for regulation have been also widely criticized, in particular for the AI developers and technology developers. But I think we're not talking here about setting certain barriers to innovation, to progress, but rather what is important is to set certain safeguards and prevent those negative impacts on our lives, on our rights in terms of using the AI. Now, second point that I would like to emphasize is that at this stage, AI in decision-making can be only used as an auxiliary tool, not as a decision maker, so to say, not in automated decision-making, in particular if we talk about the justice field, which is of more interest probably for the audience. So judicial decisions, the fair trial requirements, if we look at Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights, is very clear that require transparent decision-making, it requires explainability, so we need to know the motives and how the decisions are reached. We need equal arms. Now, if we apply the algorithms to decision-making, then we know that algorithm and how they make decisions and how they come to certain solution is not totally clear. It cannot always be explained. So that's why we still cannot use this as a main tool, but only as a help to judges, to lawyers, and other members of the legal community to support us in decision making. Last but not least, the legal sector is, of course, very conservative in this field in terms of various innovations and the use of technologies in the field of law. But life is changing very fast, even for lawyers. And today we should not be surprised when we hear about terms like algorithmic law or robot judge. Indeed, it's not from fantasy world, it's already a reality, not always with very positive impact, as I mentioned, but it already exists. So I'm very confident that we as lawyers, we need to continue self-educating ourselves and our young generation of lawyers on the use of technologies and AI in particular. And because firstly, many legal functions and manual legal functions are already carried out and could continue be carried out increasingly by AI. So instead, lawyers could concentrate on more sophisticated, more complex assignments that require really features and characteristics that AI cannot still capture at the moment. So if we want to use AI for help, we need to know how this extra help works. And of course, those who will know, they will have competitive advantage in the market. Secondly, we have to be aware that technologies are not created by lawyers. So to be able to use AI in particular to litigate, and we see already a lot of litigation going on concerning the harm caused by AI. So lawyers need to understand how these technologies operate, in particular if they need to rebut and to litigate against certain decisions taken with the support of AI. So this requires, of course, specialized knowledge, which neither the courts nor the advocates usually have. But of course, lawyers at the same time do not need to become now the technicians or coding specialists, but increasingly, I think the education in how these technologies work is very, very important. And last but not least, I think we're not far from the fact that lawyers might get the obligation, actually, in counseling, in consulting the client, obligation to inform the client of all possible ways to protect the client's interests, including those that could be developed by AI or proposed by AI. And not doing so could be considered as negligence in the near future. So there are really many, many issues to be discussed today. We have excellent speakers to whom I'm very, very grateful to join this event. Now, this event we consider again as our contribution of our law school to the legal community and broader community on this, I must say, educational road to technologies and human rights. And the event is carried out in partnership with Verslo žinios and Infolex, for which we are very much grateful. And of course, very, very special thanks to the main organizer, Gintarė Samuolė, and our Institute of International and EU Law for this initiative. I'm also very grateful to the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, to its representative for joining, for supporting this event, and again, all speakers who contribute to this event and the important efforts to bring us all together around this important topic. And of course, all of you who joined in this early morning of Friday. So thank you very much. And I wish you very encouraging, very inspiring, and very interesting conference to dwell on issues which are still new for the legal community.
Thank you, Lira, very much for a perfect introduction to the questions we will analyze today. And I'm very happy that the first presentation will be from the side of the European Agency for Fundamental Rights to check what is the outlook of the EU regulator that spends so much efforts to look into this question in a very thorough way. So I'm very happy to present Dr. David Rachel, who is a project manager at the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, and he's responsible for managing agency's research on artificial intelligence and on online content moderation. So many reports, including report on artificial intelligence and fundamental rights, came from his side. So David, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Tara, and good morning, everyone. It's a big pleasure for me to be here, and I would really like to thank the Mykolas Romeris University Law School for inviting me to this very timely and great event, especially Lyra, thank you for the invitation, and also Gintarė for the great organization and support. So as was mentioned, I work for the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of the agency, so we are one of the over 40 EU agencies. We are based in Vienna, but of course we are responsible for covering the entire EU. Our main mandate is to collect data and provide analysis and expertise on fundamental rights issues to the EU institutions and the member states as one of the core tasks. So as part of this task, obviously, we have to look into important new developments, new technologies. And part of this, we are also covering research on artificial intelligence and are heavily engaged in policy development. So in the next 15 minutes, I think I will give you a quick overview. We'll start with the developments and state of policy development in relation to regulating AI in the EU and a little bit beyond. And we'll then present a few selected findings of our research on fundamental rights implications of the use of artificial intelligence and conclude with a few ways forward, and happy to receive any questions you may have. So let me share my screen first. I hope you can see it.
Yeah, sure.
Very good, thank you. Great. So for us, it started around 2017. I mean, of course, before we had some projects where we looked into technological issues, biometrics, for example, border controls, surveillance technologies, and so forth. But it really happened in 2017 that the EU institutions woke up in a way and started. The European Parliament first published a few resolutions highlighting ethical and fundamental rights concerns with the use of new technologies, big data, robotics, AI. At the same time, also in October 2017, the Council of the EU concluded and called the Commission to get active in this area, as there is a need to do something. And that was also when, in the beginning of 2018, that the Commission also, and before, also approached the Fundamental Rights Agency to do something. And then the Commission published a communication on AI for Europe in April 2018, outlining the relevance of fundamental rights as well, and also created a high-level expert group on artificial intelligence that was preparing ethics guidelines on the use of AI, but also policy recommendations. The agency was part of this high-level group, and we contributed to these discussions. And it very quickly became clear in these discussions that a regulation is needed. And that was also when the Commission very soon announced that they are planning to regulate AI and coming up with a new law. First, there was a white paper published in February 2020, where the plans were outlined. Fundamental rights already featured strongly in this white paper, as was mentioned before, data protection as a core concern, but there's more, of course, so also non-discrimination as an important area, and so forth. In the end, it was in March or April 2021, when the Commission proposed a regulation for artificial intelligence, as it's called, the AI Act. This AI Act is currently with the co-legislators, so the European Parliament has several committees responsible for it, and they are negotiating their positions. The Council is proposing compromise texts, and the plan is at the moment that in the course of next year, early next year, if there's an agreement in the Parliament, that the trilogue will start, Commission, Parliament, and the Council, and to potentially adopt this regulation in the course of next year. How this will develop is, of course, very hard to anticipate, as there's a lot of discussions ongoing. I also would like to mention that only recently, the regulation 2022-2068, which we know since a few days, was published in the official journal of the EU, is the Digital Services Act. That also has important provisions that are relevant for transparency and understanding fundamental rights risks when it comes to the use of AI in online services. So that's also an important law that is now adopted already, and now the pathway into its implementation has started. At the same time, the Council of Europe is really important. There is a committee that negotiates a treaty on artificial intelligence, which is currently underway. The man should run until the end of next year. And this is also an important international process to be followed. Of course, Council of Europe has more member states than the EU, so that has a broader reach. And this framework convention may also be then adopted by countries beyond Europe. And so it can have a farther reach as well. Other international organizations are working heavily on AI regulation as well. The OECD is very active. They also have principles on the use of AI. And UNESCO finally also published or adopted recommendations on the ethical use of AI at the global level, which was also quite a milestone. The international organizations are cooperating, so we are in constant exchange, I would say. And there's also a website, if you're interested, called globalpolicy.ai, where you can just click on the logos, and then you can see some of the work of these agencies, of these organizations. And I think it's quite relevant because, as was mentioned before, so everyone is looking a bit at the international level, because it is a global phenomenon that we are dealing with. So what is the agency doing? First of all, in all these discussions, we had to promote a rights-based approach. There was, in this extensive policy making, there was often the discussion, what kind of ethics do we need when we use AI? And this is good, and that's of course great, but it was also important to remind people that there is existing normative standards, most notably in the form of human rights that states have to adhere to. And the problem with ethics sometimes was also that it was used as a sort of a voluntary framework for companies that they may use or may not use. And it took a while, but after a while became quite clear that we need like a clear regulation in this area, which is firmly based on the commitments by states to human rights, because there are legal obligations. Secondly, there was and still is a big need for an evidence-based approach. The field of AI obviously is very, very broad. The technology can be used in virtually all areas of life. And at the same time, there was and still is a lack of knowledge on how AI can be used. As we nicely heard before, it's everywhere and nowhere. And this way, there's the need to come up with more concrete studies on how this is used, because often the discussions are quite abstract. I see a lot of science fiction influenced discussions of what AI may be, and that's not really what we need. But we really need to see like how it can be used in practice, and then discussing these issues. And that was also when FRA started working on this, trying to collect information on concrete use cases of artificial intelligence in the EU. So as was mentioned, we have a few publications in the area, one that generally deals with discrimination when algorithms are used for decision making. We had one on data quality and AI as one of the core concerns, also from a fundamental rights perspective. We had a paper on facial recognition technology, and then a main report called Getting the Future Right, Artificial Intelligence and Fundamental Rights, which was based on a study where we looked into 5 EU member states and interviewed private companies and public administration on their use and the plans of using artificial intelligence, the kind of tests they are doing, and the awareness of fundamental rights issues. And I will speak a little bit about the results of this main results report. We also have another report upcoming very soon, by the end of November. Hopefully, we will publish another report on biased algorithms, where we look into feedback loops in predictive policing on the one hand, and ethnic and gender bias in offensive speech detection on the other hand, and try to add a little more evidence to the ongoing policy discussions on regulating AI. Not dwelling too much on it, but it is also important that there is yet no accepted definition of AI. It's still being discussed. We used for our research the definition used from the high-level expert group on AI, which you can read on the slide. I won't read it out, but I'm not sure how you feel about it. But if I read it, I don't really get what it's about. And if you feel the same like I do, then you're not alone, because when we interviewed people, we really saw that there's a variety of different imaginations of what AI could be. You know, some people are quite easygoing and they say any algorithm, any Excel file that automates something is AI. Others say, no, it only starts when machine learning is used. And then again, others say, no, it's even a more advanced deep learning, whatever structures. So the main point is there is no agreement yet, but this is, of course, an important discussion for the policy making, because for legal certainty, it's very important to be clear on what is actually covered under this rather vast term called artificial intelligence. So I quickly highlight 3 rights areas. Of course, it was mentioned, and it is important to mention data protection, the rights to private and family life, Article 7 and 8 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Everyone is aware of this. So all people we interviewed knew about their data protection. However, it's not entirely clear actually how to apply data protection when you use AI. The threshold, like what is personal data and what is non-personal data, is not always clear. It was not easy for us to understand what kind of data people were using. And secondly, I mean, the GDPR is really, as was also mentioned, AI is regulated, and the GDPR is for sure the most modern law we have to also address AI. At the moment, it has good provisions on automated decision-making and human review, but also those who used AI were not entirely sure still how to apply it and how well it is covered by the GDPR. So there was still some uncertainty and that's also something that needs more clarification in the future. Secondly, a core area, equality and non-discrimination. So people we interviewed usually were aware, oh yeah, discrimination that can happen when you use AI. At the same time, the users of AI said, but not our tool. Our tool is fine. We don't use information on gender or ethnic origin or age, and so all is fine. And the problem is that's not necessarily true, because when you process a lot of data, there's quite easily some information included in a data set that links to one of the protected characteristics. And this way it can lead to discrimination. So in general, there was a lack of in-depth analysis of discrimination of those planning or using artificial intelligence. Also, the rights of special groups were not much mentioned in the interviews. So people were not so much aware. Child rights, rights of the elderly, rights of people with disabilities clearly needs more attention. And then lastly, the right to an effective remedy. We heard also in the introduction and the opening about the importance to know that AI is used for decisions, because people have the right to complain. And so those we interviewed usually knew that this right exists and also thought about doing something in this respect, but not many complaints were received by companies so far, which partly is also linked that many are still planning to use AI on the one hand, but on the other hand is still this lack of awareness for people that some algorithms may be used for some decision making. And the last point linked to this is that, as was mentioned also in the introduction, the equality of arms. When you complain, when you want to go to court because you think you were, or you have a good reason to assume you were mistreated based on the use of AI, those using AI need to be in the position to fully explain how they used AI. And this is a bit of a contested area, because people usually say AI is difficult to understand. It's very complex. We don't know what's going on. And here it's an important question, in what areas and to what extent this can be accepted or not. Because if there are decisions being made about people, usually it's not acceptable that people say, we just don't know what's going on. So users of AI really need to make sure that they can explain how they arrive at certain decision. And that does not mean you need to understand millions of parameters at once, but you need to have had done a lot of testing that allows you to get a good intuitive understanding how you arrive at certain decisions. These were three rights areas I mentioned before, but as it's really important to acknowledge that other fundamental rights are impacted as well. As I said, AI can be used in virtually all areas of life, and so all rights may be impacted. In a positive way, of course, as well, but it can also challenge those rights. We highlight good administration as an important fundamental right, mainly addressed at the EU institutions, but also for national member states. And that also includes a lot of provisions, in being transparent, fair decision-making, right to access, and right to challenge decisions and so forth. Consumer protection is a core concern. It's so much used by private companies. Even social security and assistance, because in this area, algorithms are more and more used by public administrations. And then the list continues. Freedom of expression for online communication, right to assembly, if you use face recognition on the streets, right to education. There was this huge mess up of grading in the United Kingdom when algorithm was used, tried to be used during the pandemic. Right to asylum. I mean, the border agencies are very keen on using new technologies, which as such is fine, but it needs to be carefully done, because you can challenge the right to asylum. Collective bargaining, fair, just working conditions. Think about, Uber drivers, the gig economy. So all the fundamental rights are impacted in one way or the other, and that really depends on where it is being used. So we advocate for impact assessment. So far, we've seen that when companies and public administration use AI, they're testing on technology issues. They try to be in line with data protection law, but not go much beyond. And so here it's really needed to come in also with more regulation. And that's what is also being currently discussed in the AI Act and elsewhere. So to sum up, as I'm aware of the time, at the minimum, when one plans to use AI, you need to process data legally, meaning the full force of data protection law kicks in. You need to make sure that you don't discriminate, don't put people at a disadvantage based on protected characteristics, and you have to make decisions allowed to be them contestable, making them aware that AI is used, inform them where and how to complain, and make sure that decisions can be explained. I see that I run out of time. I have 2 more slides. I will say them in 2 sentences. As I said, most of it, so it's about impact assessment, all fundamental rights considerations, put in place effective oversight and accountability schemes, and then invest more in discrimination testing, provide guidance on data protection, and then finally, make sure you can explain how you arrive decision in case someone wants to challenge you. That was a bit of a quick stop, but I hope it was a good overview, and I'm more than happy to receive any questions either now or later. Thank you.
Thank you, David, very much. I agree that actually it was a perfect overview of the work of the Fundamental Rights Agency, and now we know in very simple words what we should expect from the regulation that will cover the AI areas. We are very interested and waiting for the upcoming report that you mentioned on biased algorithms that actually coincides somehow with our next presentation on invisible AI interference and human rights. And I would like to invite Dr. Yulia Razmetaeva, who is an associate professor of human rights and legal methodology department and a head of the Center of Law, Ethics and Digital Technologies at Yaroslav Mudry National Law University, and that has also a double affiliation, and she's also a visiting researcher in Uppsala University in Sweden. So, dear Julia, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning to all. I'm happy to be here and discuss AI issues and human rights. And I want to talk about some invisible interference, AI interference. Oh, sorry, my presentation doesn't work now. Sorry, let me try to do this again. But you can see now the presentation, yeah?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Something going wrong with this slide regime. Maybe it connected with recording. That sometimes happens. Okay, so I just switch between slides in this way. So talking about artificial intelligence interference, these technologies, I mean artificial technologies, promised to be a breakthrough for humanity. They were to be on those greatest achievements that opened the way to history turning points, a better future, prosperity, and not last role in this expectations was played by the perceived reliability, accuracy, impartiality, and strong predictive power of algorithmic tools. But today, adaptive and imperceptible AIs are spreading in all areas of life, significantly influence us actually. And our dependence on algorithmic decision-making and relying on others' opinion is growing at a much faster pace than the changing in legal regulation, and our own experience can keep up with. Human rights are undergoing new interventions and new threats, and they are changing significantly in the digital age. Conceptually, it includes the fact that the scope of recognized fundamental rights is changing in unpredictable way. The boundaries between physical and digital actions are gradually blurring. The applications of various criteria to the such activities, I mean, in digital space, in real space and analog space, they are, or actually also blurring, and human rights is to be embedded in existing theoretical structures and legal doctrines, and digital rights are becoming increasingly important. So of course, human rights benefit in some way from the spread of AIs. For instance, if we take an example of freedom of expression, it's gaining new tools for implementation, such as online platforms with extremely wide audience, almost intense dissemination of information in cyberspace, or some works of digital art. At the same time, it's becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish one's own opinions from those imposed, and a real public discussion from controlled by clever algorithms tuned in the interest of certain actors. And it's becoming increasingly clear that the exercise and protection of fundamental rights today cannot be approached with some traditional, well-established measures, as right-based threats which are unpredictable, rapidly changing, and may lead to extremely serious negative consequences. So I made here the root scheme of some AI implications which could affect some fundamental rights in a strong way. And if we look on AI's implications on privacy, for instance, you know that privacy should be becoming now as really essential, as designed to leave us with control over our lives. And with AI spreading, it's difficult to prove concrete privacy violations and explain how they are made, and personal harm or personal data may no longer be necessary elements for privacy protection, even because those pieces of data that are tracked and interconnected by algorithms may not be personal in order to get such information of our life that would allow us to seriously interfere with in the private part. And personal harm may be unclear, delayed, or can be part of the harm done to the social group, community, society as a whole. In addition, the continued implementation and deployment of AIs will require us to intervene more and more in privacy. Why? Because if you have an algorithm, you need to feed this algorithm, feed it with data, and if you propose to create a more contextual, more smart, more diverse algorithm, you need to have more and more data, including more sparse, sensitive data, and it will also increase the risk of intrusion into the privacy of those individuals and groups who, due to their special features, small numbers, seclusion, or other characteristics, fall out of algorithmic accounting. AIs influence our opinions and choices in many ways now. We may feel like we have more freedom of our choices today than ever before. In online environment, we can literally have an individual reality that looks like the result of our own choices about what to see and read, what services to use, and what opinions to trust. However, there are behind the scenes people, and AIs, of course, who communicate with us through our feeds, virtually convey the ideas by filtering off the information they believe we ought not to see. And developers and customers of AI instruments may know us better than the best friend, collecting digital breadcrumbs in incredible numbers. AI makes it relatively easy to define our preference, successfully profiling and targeting us, and influence us strongly. So digital platforms and AI tools, they are persistent, adaptive, ambiguous, and almost imperceptibly. They are part of the familiar landscape for us. And these invisible AIs are increasingly determining important decisions in an almost invisible way. Again, trust is growing in artificial agents parallel, and AIs receive this unreasonable trust, and moreover, we stop wondering if they deserve it. Remarkably, we can have the feeling that nothing special is happening. Just that the online services we are used to are getting better every day, and their recommendations are more and more in line with our interests. Users are receiving partially distant streams of online content, and initially based on their own behavior choices, and further personalized by online platform algorithms' determination of what should be prioritized and for what purpose. So AIs gains trust and then legitimacy. And in the terms of Mireille Hillenbrand, what counts as legal norms are and principle must be public in the sense of being visible and legible for every person that is expected to comply with them. And AIs, in most cases, don't through such a stage of public discussion as laws before being introduced into a public domain. It seems that we never vote for AIs in power. Besides, there has been, I return to the scheme again, there has been a disproportionate increase in trust of AI's owners. Often that's some companies, especially big tech companies, which are traditionally seen as members of the private sector of society. This in turn may contribute to the undermining trust in other institutions and some redistribution of legitimacy. Firstly, the information we receive from companies may be perceived by us as more trustful than the given by us by some public institutions. Secondly, corporations, companies are increasingly dictate the agenda, increasing dependence on their digital product, on their algorithmic products, and using their influence on public opinion. And thirdly, since many of algorithms used in the public decisions are approved by companies, are privately developed, or contain some trade secrets, they are increasingly less accountable, while the moral responsibility for the negative consequences of their use falls largely on governments. At the same time, those who are behind AI, who own AI, are starting to take on a normative role instead of governments. AI tools with this private part of algorithms protected by trade secrets are moving deeper into decision-making, including in courts. If we take an example of intervention tried to a fair trial by implementing AI in decision-making, we could see that there are some issues. First of all, algorithmic discrimination, as a colleague of mine told now, and AI could repeat biases, AI amplify them many times over, AI could find self-learning, AI could build discriminative patterns, but also the algorithmic discrimination is stemmed from situation, you can't have the same diversity as with human judges. So decision-making, including judges, can consider all individual features and circumstances. Even rare case, we can solve it based on the principles of law and legal norms and experience of judges and even some sense of justice. Algorithms, AIs, can only consider a limited set of them, of circumstances, relying on previously embedded data in courts. Some smart algorithms, they, of course, are capable of self-learning, but their ability to take into account an infinite number of circumstances and individual threats is questionable. Decision makers also are required to act within the framework outlined by the demand of justice, democracy, human rights, and specific norms and precedents. And while complying with these requirements, they may act in accordance with this sense of justice, or given proper justification for this. But there is also another issues of stemming from this AI in decision making. We can describe it as those that arise from the need to interpret the law and the problems of explaining the decisions made on the basis of law, especially in the motivation part. So while the interpretation of law given by judges differs across legal systems, and it's not always what everyone agrees on, AI is not a good substitute here. The ability of AIs to interpret law is more than questionable as such, because the interpretation of law, it's not mechanical work, and it's not something that can be programmed for the endless series of cases that the courts face. Indeed, there are simple cases, there are cases we could group into typical cases. However, the variability in live cases in this circumstances is higher than the variability that is acceptable for working algorithm. In addition, the interpretation of law based not only on data that can be fed on smart algorithm, but also on the some experience and even some intuitions of judges. And the ability of AIs to explain the decision is also questionable. So AI seems to be able to describe the solution, but not to motivate. In other words, we can follow how the algorithm arrives to a particular solution, but it is not clear why it arrives at this solution. And returning to AI interference to autonomy, we have the right to determine our own interests and actions, and this individual interest should be our own, that we care about them, that we have motives to act on them. And it seems that we are not born with an understanding of what this interest constitutes, so it takes some time to figure out our aspirations as we gain life experience. What can be quite ominous today is that we are literally grown up in fusion with technological tools, with algorithmic tools, and in digital spaces, and this is shaping our experience in a completely different way. So perhaps this is not threatening in itself, but one cannot help but think that we are probably less and less able to separate imposed interests from really our own. And it is already quite difficult to determine the degrees where the influence of AI turns into manipulation and where already into the some correctional behavior and literally control over us. So perhaps the most important question is not how we live and deal with AIs, but how we would like to live with them. What balance of interaction between people and AIs would we like to have, how much power, and under what conditions are we ready to give AIs of those who are behind them, what control mechanism we need for this. And all these questions, they are not speculative, but very practical today. Perhaps we should also come to terms with the fact that the future with AIs, as we imagine, it turned out to be less about space travel or humanoid robot than about prompts popping up in smartphone screen and highly targeted ads in a language learning app, as well as virtual battles in social networks for voices, for voters' voices. So I will stop here because that's time. And if you have some questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you, Julia, very much. Your thoughts actually raise very interesting questions for all of us that are listening. What I was thinking, do we still own our choices and decisions? And does our autonomy belongs to us? And how artificial, again, we are inside, because we trust AI so easily, we trust things that we don't see so easily, and how we delegated our rights to AI. And maybe that is why we are talking again about the question of the legal personality of the AI that will come up maybe in the future. So it's even more interesting when we talk about Big Brother issue, and that's the next topic about surveillance technologies and privacy protection that will be presented by Associate Professor Dr. Renata Marcinauskaitė, who is from Institute of Criminal Law and Procedure at Mykolas Riomeris University. So thank you, Julia, very much, and I would like to invite Renata on stage.
Good morning. Today, I would like to share some insights with the audience about surveillance technologies, the use of artificial intelligence in this field, also rise and maybe, I don't know, try to solve some legal issues related to privacy protection. Surveillance of persons' activities is generally understood as concentrated and systematic attention to personal information, and is performed for various purposes. It is characterized by several aspects that allow us to understand such type of activity. And for lawyers, of course, discuss some legal concerns. And first of all, surveillance is focused on gathering information about individuals themselves or their surroundings. And this is already one problem. It is not random, but usually systematic and deliberate. It is the second problem. And surveillance can be carried out for various purposes. It can be, for example, control, influence, security, also scientific purposes and others. It is usually a common administrative procedure in the modern society. And as we are talking about modern society, such type of activity is usually performed by using various technologies. If we focus on more sophisticated surveillance technologies, not just simple cameras, we will inevitably face the question, how do machines learn? Technologies based on the use of artificial intelligence were created developing machine learning and deep learning technologies that underpin artificial intelligence capabilities in certain areas. The main idea behind the machine and deep learning is the use of data for system training, because systems learn from data. During machine learning process, certain algorithms are applied to achieve the goals by recognizing patterns in the data and using this gain knowledge when new data is presented for the system. Deep learning is more capable than machine learning because of the use of layered structure of algorithms. So we have input layer, hidden layers, and output layer, and more hidden layers we have, the deeper network is. And this structure is called an artificial neural network. And as we can see, such concept is inspired by biological neural network of the human brain. And this type of learning requires vast amount of data and minimal human intervention during learning process. And artificial intelligence is capable of interpreting various data, of learning and developing by itself in its own acceptable way. And the result of artificial intelligence interpretations compared to human activity can be qualitatively different and conditioned by those processes that were passed through during data processing, and discuss the aspect represent the relevant point in machine and deep learning that the most important resource to improve artificial intelligence-based technologies is data. Accordingly, for lawyers, this means data and privacy protection issues. It can be mentioned that machines can learn, summarize, and develop in certain way in different areas of human activities if large scale of data sets related to specific sphere are available to train deep learning algorithms. So building surveillance technologies based on the use of artificial intelligence, the vast amount of data about individuals, their biological or behavioral aspects is required, and the collection and processing of such data must meet legal standards. So the process of surveillance we can divide into two stages. The first is machine training, and the second is the use of trained machines. These are intelligence surveillance technologies where the privacy protection must already be guaranteed at the very first stage. And for example, according to patterns of crimes and victimization, surveillance technologies can be used as additional threat assessment tool for crime prevention. Also, surveillance technologies used for monitoring certain public places can make it possible to perform such functions as face, voice, and speech recognition, motion detection, positioning and tracking of subjects and objects, crowd and flow direction detection, behavior patterns, and anomaly detection. And data sets used in these cases are usually obtained through governmental surveillance. Regardless of which surveillance stage we have in mind, the system training or the use of intelligence surveillance technologies, it is important to define what is considered as person's private life in the light of technology's development. And the reason for that is the legal requirements that are applied for private life protection and must be respected in both stages while processing large-scale data sets and using developed technologies to gather information about individuals or their surroundings. And the legal concept of private life is, in the most general sense, is linked with the state of individual when the individual may expect privacy or with legitimate expectations of private life. The right to privacy seeks to ensure the development of each individual in their relationship with others without external interference. On the other hand, legal acts do not normally detail the concept of private life. Therefore, a decision what belongs to the private life of individual and which information is within the scope of private life is based on the assessment of all circumstances. And for example, it is noted in the case law of Lithuanian courts that any assessment of such circumstances need to take into consideration the relationship of the information collected with the private life of a particular person, whether it relates to truly sensitive aspects of private life, whether, although not being intimate in itself, it has been collected in the ways interfering with privacy, or whether it is only more general information quite often disclosed by the person themselves in different cases. Some categories of privacy are also mentioned in the jurisprudence of the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Lithuania, which states that the Constitution provides that the private life of a human being is the personal life of an individual, the way of life, marital status, living surroundings, relationships with other people, views, convictions, habits of the individual, his physical or psychological state, health, honor, dignity, and other. And as already mentioned, it is impossible to provide an exhaustive definition of private life and set its clear limits. Therefore, the status of particular data will depend on the context of a large number of circumstances at issue. Although an exhaustive definition is actually impossible, we can try to outline and define internal structure of privacy according to the interpretation of the previously mentioned jurisprudence. Hence, mutually interrelated areas of personal independence can comprise territorial, information, and communication privacy. And although such categorizations are of more theoretical nature, they are helpful for clear understanding of actions that can violate individuals' private life. In the field of surveillance technologies, it is important not only to keep in mind that person's private life is a broad category, which does not lend itself to a precise definition, but also to understand that the right to the respect of private life must be interpreted dynamically, considering societal developments as well as technological progress, which provides further possibilities for interfering into the private life of a person. And data used for the machine or deep learning or received during the use of surveillance technologies must be evaluated every time, deciding whether it is related to the private life of a person and what legal requirements are imposed for such data processing. And surveillance technologies can be used at several levels. At the level of a state, for example, already mentioned public places surveillance, companies, as well as individuals within private home dwellings. And as regards privacy, it is important to note that according to European Court of Human Rights, it would be too restrictive to limit the notion of private life to an inner cycle, in which the individual may live his own personal life as he chooses, and to exclude entirely the outside world not encompassed with that cycle. And respect for private life must also comprise to a certain degree the right to establish and develop a relationship with other human beings. And this leads to the fact that the protection of a person's private life must be ensured also in cases when individual deals with the so-called outside world, for example, when he gets to monitored public places, perform employees' duties in workplace. Therefore, a combination of legal instruments should be used to protect privacy from unauthorized governments, organizations, or individuals' intervention. And for example, the General Data Protection Regulation, I will just call it regulation, which came into force in 2018, is a European Union-wide regulation that controls how personal data should be handled. This regulation requires implementation of privacy by design and privacy by default for any personal data processing. And in this context, data processing is understood in the broader sense and covers any activity with personal data, including, for example, collection, recording, organization, use, and destruction. And data processing must comply with the principles specified in the regulation. Personal data should be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently. and this is the principle of lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. There must be a clear lawful basis for such processing. This is the purpose limitation principle. Also, there are other principles such as data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality, accountability, and others. In addition, regulation establishes specific rights of the data subject, for example, such as the right to know what personal data is processed, the right to be forgotten, and many other aspects of personal data processing. It is relevant that information about a person can be obtained from various sources in the cyberspace, and data subject rights must be ensured in both stages, developing and using artificial intelligence-based surveillance technologies. As surveillance technologies can be used to monitor employees' activities at the company level, it is worth noting that private life can also include individuals' activities of a business and professional nature that can be carried out outside of a person's home. And evaluating whether a person's right to respect his private life was limited by means of surveillance technologies, a set of circumstances must be assessed, and European Court of Human Rights clarified that the restrictions imposed by the employer cannot completely limit the private social life of the employee at the workplace, and the court recognized that communications such as phone calls or emails sent from businesses' premises are protected by the principle of privacy of correspondence. It concluded that instant message communications are qualified as correspondence even when sent from a person's workplace. And the court also listed a number of factors that have to be assessed deciding on the lawfulness of the use of surveillance technologies, and for example, whether the employee has been notified of the possibility that his communications may be monitored by employer, the extent of the monitoring, and the degree of the intrusion onto the employee's privacy, whether the employer has provided legitimate reasons to justify the monitoring, whether it would have been possible to establish a monitoring system based on less intrusive methods, and the consequences of the monitoring for the employee subjected to it, and whether the employee had been provided with adequate safeguards. Monitoring technologies used in the workplace may vary in functionality and therefore have different capabilities. For example, these can be server programs installed on employers' network and are typically designed to control network usage. Client programs that are installed directly on employees' computer and allow to monitor the employees' activities using this computer. Also, there can be artificial intelligence-based technologies that, for example, can perform face or voice recognition, that track abnormal behavior of employees and others. And considering the differences of such technologies and accordingly their possibilities to intervene into individuals' private life at different level, the principle of proportionality becomes extremely relevant. Accordingly, every surveillance technology must be legal, necessary to achieve a defined goals, and proportionate. And selected surveillance technologies may not perform more than it is required to fulfill the purpose for which they were applied, and if the goals can be reached with less intrusive measures, the priority must be given for latter measures. And so here comes some conclusions that artificial intelligence-based technologies, hence also surveillance technologies, will inevitably expand. They will learn a little bit more about human beings. Their findings may become more accurate and prognostic. And in this process of developing technologies, human privacy must not be forgotten, not only in the machine training, but also in the use of intelligence surveillance technology stages. And in such cases, adequate privacy protection standard must be established and periodically reviewed considering technology changes. So I think this will be it, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Renata, very much for your thorough analysis of the surveillance and privacy protection. I understand that privacy protection is to be guaranteed even in the sandbox regime when machines are still learning, and that people have a right to be left alone and not to take part in that work of a machine. So again, it raises a question, a philosophical question: is surveillance that is based on AI, is it in general compatible with privacy protection when we do not have clear default limits where it starts and where it ends, because it's a habit that we exchange privacy for comfort now, not seeing it, and I think that it can be even more dangerous if we have a combination with other AI data and combine surveillance with other data. And thank you for your optimism, saying that AI will still inevitably expand and learn. So continuing with our conference, I think that monitoring and surveillance has a different meaning in other contexts, especially in armed conflict circumstances and condition. And this is the topic that we will be talking about next 20 minutes. And the topic will be presented by Professor Justina Žilinskas, who is expert of international humanitarian law and also a keen expert of various technologies as a user and as a lawyer. So please, Justina, take the stage. Tell us about the issue if robots need to learn international humanitarian law.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Well, I cannot describe myself as an expert in technologies, maybe just an advanced user. But indeed, I would like to talk about a very specific issue that is generally known as killer robots. It's a kind of a catchphrase. It's a now very popular word, but it indeed poses very serious problems. I will only have one slide. Again, I'm sorry, but I remember very well a comment of one of my colleagues from military field, who said that United States failed in Iraq campaign because it was all planned on PowerPoint. So I don't want to do the same mistake. Okay, so let me proceed. First law. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. That's the second law. Third law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. I don't know whether you heard or not about these laws, but they were formulated long ago by great futurist and also science fiction author Isaac Asimov. And they indeed tried, from the human perspective, to deal with the advent of robotics. And of course, they're very humane. Unfortunately, nowadays, we have to forget about those humane laws of robotics. And it's too naive to think that humans would not put robotic and artificial intelligence system on the battlefield. In fact, it's already there. The first case allegedly happened in Libya just recently using STM Cargo 2 system that was specifically designed to identify and attack military targets. In one form or another, such systems are more to come. No, it's not T800 or T1000 yet, but with the current tech developments, machines will take over. And the only thing that we can guess is when it will be. That's what we had in the previous presentations, that they will learn. On the other hand, imagine there's no humans. I wonder if you dare. Machines are breaking one another and not a lost soul out there. And is it not a dream to dream that robots are taking over the war as they were intended to take our jobs? Therefore, in my presentation, I would like to outline a few things. First, I would like to contemplate on a question whether a law of armed conflict or international humanitarian law is in general applicable to these new systems. Second, is international humanitarian law is capable to deal with the autonomic weapon systems? And is this sub-branch of law is ready for the robots, for artificial intelligence, and what are attempts to deal with it? So let me start with the definitions because, well, this is quite particular technology. First, of course, IT technologies are inseparable from military machinery. However, we need to draw the line when technology becomes autonomous, artificial intelligence technology, or we may refer as military robots, although the line is rather blurred. Depending on various definitions used in various documents, two criteria are considered as a threshold. First, system is capable to select targets independently. Second, system is capable to engage targets independently. One more thing. When we are speaking about robots, artificial intelligence, autonomous weapons on the battlefield, it should be added that our concern is related to the word lethal, because systems can engage systems how much they need. But if the result of such engagement is human casualties, that's where the issue starts. Such casualties might be direct effect of the weapon system as well as indirect effect. As one of autonomous weapons examples is Iron Dome, an Israel defense system from incoming missiles. It is oriented only against non-human targets. Nevertheless, it might have lethal result. For example, if system malfunctions or intercepted target fall on civilian object. It also must be pointed out that lethal autonomous weapon technologies might be employed both in real world and in cyberspace. However, none of such systems would exist without its creator. And these creators are, well, we humans. And law, again, as we all know, is applicable to humans, not systems. Therefore, it is human who is creating, operating the system, and human must follow the law. While describing lethal autonomous weapon systems and human relations, there are three levels of independency. First is called human in the loop. It means that human is in constant control of the system. Human takes the most important decisions, identify target, check identification, engage, stop attack, and so on. There is not so much space for the system autonomy. Human on the loop means that system is working more independently, but human must confirm system's results. For example, system may identify and select target, but human confirms launch that may result in lethal casualties. Finally, human outside the loop means that the system is acting independently from human, and such system is fully autonomous. Of course, there might be combination of those elements in the systems as well. Therefore, when we are considering legal regulation of one or another phenomena, perhaps the most important issue is the following. Do we have and can apply an existing legal framework, or do we need to prepare a new one? There are many treaties that deals with the different weapons, starting from famous St. Petersburg Declaration of 1868 on exploding bullets. It's so-called, the real name is much more longer, ending with the most recent Convention on Cluster Munitions. Maybe we can attribute a lethal autonomous weapon system problem to any of these treaties. The problem is that lethal autonomous weapon systems are not a specific type of weapon. This is more about the way how weapon operates. Autonomous system may launch cluster munition, lay a mine, intercept rockets, engage in cyber attack. Therefore, none of specific treaties are applicable to autonomous weapon systems as such, and some treaties might be related in certain circumstances. In fact, there were already attempts to prepare a new treaty on killer robots, but perhaps the closest treaty that can address this issue is framework convention known as Convention on Prohibition or Restriction on the Use of Certain Conventional Weapons, which may be deemed to be excessively injurious or to have indiscriminate effect. This convention is known by the abbreviation CCW. So this convention looks like the right fora to speak about autonomous weapon system, because it has a system of independent protocols attached to the framework treaty, which deals with specific types of the weapons, and not only weapons as such, but also aftermath of its usage. For example, like protocol on unexploded ordnances. Therefore, it is only logical that first, more precise international mechanism to address the problem was a conventional weapons convention. The framework of this convention review procedure has debated ban on lethal autonomous weapon systems in 2021, but states did not reach consensus to proceed. Nevertheless, the expert group of Convention on Conventional Weapons called upon consideration of autonomous warfare. In 2019, developed a set of 11 principles related to autonomous weapon systems. I would not repeat them all, but I will quote some of them. First, which states that IHL, or international humanitarian law, is applicable to all current weapon systems, and B, those in development. Therefore, it's nothing new. Since times of Martin's Clause back in the beginning of the 20th century, and more recent since ICJ nuclear weapons opinion, that stated, I quote, "The entire law of armed conflict applies to all forms of warfare and to all kinds of weapons, those of the past, those of the present, and those of the future." There are no doubts that employment of new technology in weapons does not change the fact that their development, usage is regulated by international humanitarian law. There cannot be legal vacuum. The only room for discussion is how special such regulation should be. For example, is there a need for a special treaty? Currently, these promulgated principles are the only internationally announced regulation, but it's just a restatement of the law and interpretation of existing law, nothing more. Then, Principle 2 states that human responsibility for decision on the use of laws must be retained because our accountability cannot be transferred to machines. Principle 4 provides that accountability must be ensured in accordance with applicable international law, including through the operation of such systems within a responsible chain of command and control. In other words, again, there's nothing new. Such principles are applicable to any weapon or weapon system. Therefore, from those principles, it looks like that we have system in place. Humans are operating lethal autonomous weapon systems. Systems must remain under human control. Control is needed for an obvious thing, responsibility. Everyone who is controlling, using, or operating weapon is also responsible for its results under international humanitarian law and also international criminal law. And if the result of such usage would be casualties, unlawful casualties, for example, death of civilians or de combat personnel, etc., such person have to face investigation and, if needed, prosecution. I have no time now to debate the particularities of who is responsible when in the case of unlawful casualty, because it might include operator of the weapon, confirmator of the target, programmer who wrote the wrong code, or all of them. But there are more things to lethal autonomous weapon systems that meets the eye from the first impression. The problem is that lethal autonomous weapon systems are indeed may become such novel weapons not because they can autonomously identify and engage target, as I stated in the beginning while defining it, but because of the way how they are doing it. Biggest problem here is not just human outside the loop. Biggest problem is that we already have artificial intelligence systems that can learn and develop decisions without human interference. Therefore, even a very well thought code, pre-programming is just a background, this human input. So it may not be able to regulate all possible variations of robots' behavior. Such system learns by itself and develops decisions by itself. What is even more interesting and alarming, such system can develop decisions by itself in the way that humans or initial programmers might have no idea how the system came to one or another decision. To my mind, only lethal autonomous weapon systems possessing this capability are real robots and real autonomous systems, not just a sophisticated weapon with human outside the loop. With this feature, indeed comes a plethora of questions of legal character. First of all, if such systems are put on the battlefield, they should in one way or another be taught to follow the law. For example, robot may only engage another robot or clearly identified military objective when there is no civilians in the vicinity. Although protection clause also may come into play if we have a medical personnel on the battlefield or wounded soldier might appear. Programmers perhaps would say that autonomous weapon systems could be programmed to follow IHL. But what are the guarantees towards self-learning system? What about if they will develop in a way that they will find IHL not worth of applying when it learns by itself the most effective way to deal with the enemy? And can any programmer set safeguards, give guarantees that system will not go rogue, having in mind what I have just said, that system might develop in a way ununderstandable to humans as such? Yes, there are also very optimistic views that lethal autonomous weapon system and generally artificial intelligence would be much more relevant, reliant on the battlefield than humans, because autonomous weapon systems are not limited by such phenomena as fog of war. They do not need to be afraid for their lives. They can collect and process much more bigger amounts of data and theoretically can come to much better decisions than the human being. But with all these positive propositions, it still does not solve responsibility issue. Therefore, it might happen that the only person, the only human to whom criminal responsibility can be attributed in the case of incident is person who allowed the usage of the system. So only the very initial moment, because system cannot be responsible by itself. Programmer cannot be responsible for self-learning system that learns in mysterious ways. And there is no operators in real autonomous weapon system scenario. Indeed, the unexpected, unpredictable behavior of the system might create situation of lawlessness. One more problem. With very fast development of technical capabilities, such systems can very quickly escape the hands of the owners and fall in the hands of persons who simply doesn't care about law at all. So the problem of So to answer the question that was provided in the topic, the answer should be yes. Robots should be taught, of course, taught IHL. The problem is that we humans have rather weak guarantees, or maybe no guarantees whatsoever, that robots will learn IHL the way we would like them to learn. Consequently, initiatives to ban self-learning, fully autonomous, lethal autonomous weapon systems, at least for now, seems reasonable. Because we are facing phenomena when law is not capable to deal with some situations that lethal autonomous weapon systems might us put into. So with this rather non-optimistic conclusion, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'd be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Justinas, very much for your analysis on the IHL. I too agree that IHL rules are quite specific, and robots could learn IHL as machines, but in the battlefield, we require quick actions, and AI is a slow learner. So maybe if we talk about human rights protection, as you say, it would take the decision to be efficient and not proactive towards human rights, because it's the machine that picks the features that look to it more important, and not we do. So I see that we are strictly on the schedule and we don't have questions, and we would like to proceed with the next topic here on algorithms as content creators. And I would like to ask Associate Professor Dr. Marta Cantero-Gamito from Information Technology Law at the University of Tartu, and Research Fellow at the School of Transnational Governments in European University Institute, to take the stage and to talk about this.
Thank you very much, Gintare, for your introduction, and especially for the really inspiring conference. Already in the less than a couple of hours that I have been listening to colleagues and their presentations, got really inspired by all the things I am kind of learning in fields where I am not a specialist, and also getting new perspectives on areas that I touch upon in my research. But as looking at it from private regulation perspective, of course, I always appreciate seeing the perspective of all the more regulatory areas. So some of the issues I'm going to mention today have been already somehow tackled in previous presentations. I will make reference to it in due time. But in general, the umbrella topic of my presentation concerns the role of algorithms as content curators. And basically, the argument that I'm going to put forward is the fact that we have different scattered rules, and that means that as a result of that, we also have like different scattered competent authorities that may undermine the enforcement of the rules that we have to deal with the problems that content creation may present. So just to give you a quick summary of the kind of underlying questions that are going to guide my presentation, I'm going to focus on how do algorithms, very quickly, of course, how do algorithms create content, why algorithms create content, what are the rules that will apply to that algorithmic creation, and whether those rules are enough. So that's basically how simple my presentation is going to be. As a matter of introduction, I'd like to remind that we are constantly curating content, not only online, but also offline. So we, on our day-to-day, we are doing exercises of social curation. We decide with whom do we want to contact, and we choose the people we want to spend time with. This also applies academically, right? So we are all sitting today here in this conference because we had an interest to be part of this conference. We've really decided to be part of it. We also make decisions when it comes to the sources from which we obtain information. So that has to kind of form our opinion, and therefore we choose freely, in principle, what kind of media do we want to read, etc. So the newspaper we want to buy, the books we want to read, etc. This also can apply academically as well. The scholars we decide to follow, etc., etc., etc. And of course, we also, in our day-to-day life, we are constantly subject to digital content curation. So usually when we enter the internet, we kind of like decide online whether we want to access to a certain content or not, whether we want to enter Netflix or The Guardian or the New York Times. So our preferences in the digital sphere may or may not be consistent with our offline activities. But in general, this curation requires a certain level of agency. To what extent are we actually autonomously deciding? So even in the examples I just posed about the people we choose to spend time with, etc., there are different degrees of agency that make our creation to be actually directly or indirectly be controlled by us. So for instance, we are bound to be working with our colleagues when we enter an institution. We are also bound to read the news that editor has decided to put in the front cover, etc., etc., etc. So that actually make us ask the questions whether we are actually freely choosing. So I don't know if my, yes. As a result of that, I'm going to focus on platforms content curation. So content curation is actually the choice of specific contents based on our preferences. However, when we are on the internet, we are actually transferring that decision power to the platform that we might be using. That does not only apply to platforms such as Facebook or Twitter, etc., but also to platforms such as Google. But when we are accepting terms and conditions, we actually delegate that capacity to choose. So platforms, in order to perform the business and in order to provide personalized choices and personalized information, use algorithms, as has been previously explained, to actually automate that curation. And as part of that, automation is a byproduct of the provision of social media services. But there are good and actually certain advantages of automated curation. So it provides better access to information and to seemingly more accurate results than if we would have to do it on our own. So that means that when we type something on Google, we can get more relevant information related to what we are interested in looking for. Or when we are in a social media platform, we actually get more relevant content that is based in our own preferences. However, like we also get the possibility of amplifying speech as a result of automated curation. But seeing this from this perspective, we can understand then why actually Elon Musk thought that running a social media platform such as Twitter could be such an easy thing if you just dedicate yourself to actually analyze users' preferences and just curate content on the basis of that. However, now it seems to be realizing that that is actually not that easy. So there are important setbacks of the issue of creating information automatically, because it can, on the basis of algorithms, reinforce or exacerbate societal biases. It can contribute the same way that it contributes to amplifying speech. It can also contribute to amplify, for instance, hate speech. So it amplifies illegal and harmful content. As a result of that, the law requires to remove content that will be not content curation, but more specifically content moderation. At the same time, that same content moderation that platforms can do may result in the cancellation of speech. And the increasing concentration of power by this platform has posed important threats to democracy that to some extent also Julia was mentioning in her presentation, and that poses certain risks not only to democracy, but also to our fundamental rights. We all remember what happened with Brexit or with 6th January last year. So that as a result of, as a kind of introduction of the topic. So how can we address not how platforms moderate content, that is an entirely different story, in which the regulator is mandating platforms to remove illegal content from the platforms. I don't know if there is a problem. I heard somebody speaking. Okay, so shall I then continue? So the legislator has been, for instance, in the copyright directive, requiring platforms to remove content that is illegal. In the case of copyrights, content that will be infringing copyrights. But let's focus on content curation, which is a different form from content moderation. We have the recently enacted Digital Services Act that David was mentioning earlier. We also have the General Data Protection Regulation that Renata has made a fantastic journey throughout the different rules that would apply from the GDPR to AI systems. Then we have in progress a proposal for an European Media Freedom Act that was put forward, that was presented in September this year. And we also have the proposal for an Artificial Intelligence Act. So these are the different rules that one way or another touch upon the issue of content moderation. Here I have developed like a kind of chart that may help us to navigate how each of these pieces touch upon the issues of content moderation. This can be discussed because this is more like an idea in the making. But basically, when it comes to the DSA addresses content curation by talking about recommender systems. So what are the obligations or rights that arise with regard to recommender systems? So recommender systems is basically content curation that can be partially or entirely done by automated means with a view to provide content that is better suited to the user's preferences. This in principle is allowed, but it is provided in the law that platforms need to be transparent about the type of recommender systems that they use. And this involves to provide information to be included in the terms and conditions of platform contracts that in a plain and in intelligible language signals what are the most significant criteria for building the recommender system and what are for weighing this, the different criteria that have been used in order to provide the user with the specific content and not other. But here some considerations are to be made. So in addition to Article 27, very large online platforms and very large online search engines shall provide at least one option for each recommender system, which is not based on profiling. However, examining and investigating how platforms do this is actually something that might be difficult to understand unless platforms are actually providing something that they might not be willing to do, because as Julia mentioned in her presentation, some of these issues may be protected under trade secrets. Let's move to the GDPR. As Renata was mentioning in her presentation, GDPR is already quite an important tool to address issues that AI may be about. When it comes to the relevant tool for content curation, we pay attention to profiling, because profiling is actually a part of automated decision-making. One right that arises from the GDPR is the right to not be subject to a decision that is made only based on automated processing, and this includes, of course, profiling. However, this does not apply if there is a contract necessity, and here I put an asterisk because this is what online platforms usually use as the legal basis for lawfully processing personal data. And even though the European Data Protection Board has already made different interpretation of what constitutes and what does not constitute contract necessity, platforms still expand this concept extensively. But also, this will not apply if the data subject has given explicit consent. So that means that in most cases, this will be intermingled in the terms and conditions of the platform. And as we all know, we do not tend to read this as thorough as we should. But in addition to existing applicable rules such as the DSA or the GDPR, the two proposals that are on the table right now that are relevant to automated content curation may also help us to establish what is the framework for content curation at the moment in Europe. The recent proposal for the European Media Freedom Act talks about editorial responsibility. But this editorial responsibility does not apply to online platforms, but instead to traditional media service providers. However, the rules establish an obligation for online platforms to enable a functionality that allows these traditional media service providers to indicate that they are media services providers, so that users can know this certain information, it comes from a specific source, that it is abiding by the specific rules related to media. However, online platforms can refuse to actually provide services to certain media outlets. And the only way that media outlets have to contest the decision to be removed from a platform includes an internal complaint mechanism that does not establish specific guarantees, at least not in the legislation, but also it requires, the legislation requires a minimum and effective dialogue between the platform and the media service provider. If we consider some of the issues that have been already mentioned during today's presentations related to the equality of arms that was already mentioned by Lyra in her introduction to today's conference, we can already imagine what would happen if we have on the table a media service company that depends on online platforms to increase visibility and an online platform that is accumulating more and more power. And finally, I will focus on the relevance of the Artificial Intelligence Act when it comes to content curation. The tool that will approach content curation under the Artificial Intelligence Act would be the articles that deal with deepfakes. According to the risk-based approach of the Artificial Intelligence Act, deepfakes and any other AI system that presents, a risk of manipulation would be considered a system of limited risk under the risk-based approach of the AI Act. That means that it will only be subject to transparency obligations, and these transparency obligations shall not apply in the case that they collide with the right of the freedom to expression, to the right to freedom of expression. So this means that in line with Lyra's introduction this morning, there are indeed rules that regulate AI, but there are important gaps. And I think that this can be an example of those gaps and something else needs to be done. So then I finish my presentation with different questions that have been triggered when I have been addressing these issues. For example, can the protection of fundamental rights be ensured with internal market narratives? What am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is because all 4 pieces of legislation that I just introduced have been based entirely, in the case of DSA, ENFA, and the AI Act, on Article 114 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, which is not meant to do anything else but just harmonize internal market rules. The only rule that has not been entirely based on internal market justification has been the GDPR, which, in addition to be based on Article 114, has been also based on the protection, on the fundamental right to data protection. So the question here it is, wouldn't it be better to move from a risk-based approach that is focused or that places this on product and systems, and instead move to a right-based approach, such as it is more or less the case of the GDPR, that focuses on the individuals, the data subject, rather than on the system itself? Here we are not talking about mutual recognition and free movement of goods and services in the EU. Here we are talking about fundamental rights, human rights. This is something that should not be left to the functioning of the market. Also, the Media Freedom Act is way too important to actually just include 2 articles related to the role of platforms in media freedom. They somehow, once again, escape the scope of the EU legislator. But given that the DSA also uses a risk-based approach, is the DSA actually the right place to address media freedom? So under the risk approach, companies themselves, and more specifically platforms, are the ones that need to make an assessment of the kind of risk that certain practices may be constituted. So we will be leaving the definition of the risk and the reach of the consequences of these risks to the hands of just some private players. And something that it is already a topic in itself is that, of course, each and every of these different rules includes a different procedural and institutional setting that involve different rules and different actors in charge of overseeing and enforcing the rules that have been put forward. This includes different authorities at EU level, at the coordination level, and especially at national level that are in charge of applying the rules. However, it has been already found that the different competent authorities somehow do not manage to provide effective and adequate responses to the problems that an issue as important as content moderation poses. So since I think I have already reached my limit, I thank you now for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to hear your questions that you may have on my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta, very much. I see that in today's circumstances, when media moves into maximization of profit as other businesses do, it's particularly important to calibrate the risks with the public interest to know, and of course that unforeseen risks are hiding somewhere, and maybe we don't know yet about them. It's a pity we don't have much of time for the questions, and we have to move on. I would like to ask Dr. Karina Palkova to take the stage, who's a professor and lead researcher at Riga Stradins University, as well as an attorney at law, who works at field of health and medical law, and has also a big expertise in artificial intelligence. So please, Karina, take the stage.
Thank you very much. And then, yeah, I hope you see my presentation, and I will speak today about artificial intelligence in general in healthcare sector. And of course, I will speak about this technology trends and legal, as well as a little bit ethical challenges. And as we know, artificial intelligence gave us some kind of revolution points in healthcare. And healthcare has been identified, of course, as an early candidate to be transformed by artificial intelligence. And of course, how we know, revolutions actually rarely come without side effects. And what I would like to say is that artificial intelligence in healthcare gave us a lot of possibilities, a lot of advantages, but there are a lot of difficulties from this legal as well as ethical perspective. What we do suspected from artificial intelligence before we came, in our words, before we came to nowadays. First of all, of course, novel elements to the healthcare environment. Novel relationships between patients and healthcare professionals, between healthcare professionals and, of course, hospitals. And artificial intelligence impacts individuals' quality of life. There's several examples how we use artificial intelligence in healthcare in nowadays, in our daily life, in hospitals. It's chatbots, where patients can ask the system, please tell me what shall I do right now? I have headache. Please tell me what shall I do with my, let's say, some problems in my health. And sometimes medical practitioners use particular chatbots with communication for communication with patients. It's of course virtual nursing assistants, robotic surgeries, etc., etc. I mean, in nowadays we do have a lot of opportunities, the possibilities to see artificial intelligence in hospitals. What is new in artificial intelligence healthcare sector? It's of course artificial intelligence in genomics. In European Union, in the world in general, AI and genomics become very popular, very necessary mechanism to work with patients and to provide the health to the patients. And AI in genomics makes some examination of people's faces with facial to make analysis of a patient's face and to understand what kind of cancer forms do patients have, to predict how can you work with your cancer issues, what kind of progress do the patients have. Of course, there are another AI mechanisms, let's say, programs for using in healthcare. And of course, artificial intelligence is speeding up medicine development in general. It's providing personalized medicine approach to healthcare services. Again, relationships between patients and medical practitioners. Is developing new tools for medical research. So it means that artificial intelligence right now is very famous from the research perspective as well. machine learning-based radiology results analysis, and there we do have some problems from the legal, again, perspective. For instance, if radiologists work with artificial intelligence systems, do we inform patients in that case? How do you think patients do have the right to know with what kind of system do medical practitioners work? Again, developing smart devices for medical tasks. And the last one, health risk assessment. And if we look into artificial intelligence issue in the healthcare, the legal perspectives comes to us. And what is important is this regulation and this legal framework and proportionality between artificial intelligence regulation in general, and my colleagues told you a little bit about the regulation, general regulation of artificial intelligence in European Union, and on the other hand, this specific medical law issues, patients' rights, medical practitioners' rights, hospitals' rights and duties. So the balance between this medical law rights and artificial intelligence and public in general. And as we know, it's often advanced that algorithmic decision-making may lead to, let's say, fair and more inclusive outcomes than human judgments or decisions, for instance, based on ad hoc rules. And on the other hand, algorithms are designed to make this discrimination, some kind of discrimination, and this discrimination, actually my colleague spoke as well, the data discrimination. But I will not speak about the discrimination issue right now. And the benefits of artificial intelligence in healthcare and of course, i.e. integration into the healthcare ecosystem. It allows to work with huge amount of patients' data or patients' data sets to make some decision, to make the analysis of this data to understand what kind of illnesses do patients have. And more than 30% of healthcare costs are associated with administrative tasks. And artificial intelligence, of course, can automate some of these tasks, like pre-authorizing insurance. Actually, there are some systems in Latvia as well where artificial intelligence try to answer to emails that hospitals receive from the patients. So communication between patients and artificial intelligence systems. And artificial intelligence has the ability to analyze, as I told before, big data sets, pulling together this patient's insight and leading afterward to predictive analysis. And of course, quickly obtaining patients' insight help the healthcare professionals, healthcare, I must say, ecosystem to discover key areas of patients, care that require some improvements in this particular case. And the next one benefit is these softwares, technologies based on smartwatches, as we call it, smartwatch. And these systems, these technologies help us to analyze again our private specific patients' data to alert users and their healthcare professionals on potential health issues and some risks. For instance, I watch my smartwatch and there are some signals that I do have some problems with my sugar in my blood, and the medical practitioner receives this information and must act to save my life, to save my to improve my healthcare situation. And therefore, when we speak about artificial intelligence and healthcare issues, we must find this balance between legal regulation and patients' rights. And as we know, the patient's rights has a huge amount of duties and responsibilities. But in general, the patient's rights is several one, for instance, right to access. And again, if the patient has the right to access, and if their artificial intelligence system that we use in healthcare, the question is about the data transfer and data issues. GDPR, and my colleagues told you about this. So right to information, again, as I told you, medical practitioner works with the IE system. So it means that patients must be informed about this activity, because artificial intelligence system, and this is the using of artificial intelligence system is the part of medical treatment process, and the responsible for the medical treatment process according to national and international rules, of course, is medical practitioner. So right to information, do we inform the patient about AI or other robotics actually in healthcare? And again, right to consent. This is very important and very difficult to inform consent issues. Do I agree as a patient? Am I informed enough about the possibilities and how do artificial intelligence systems work in general? Right to free choice. Again, it's very related to informed consent, to right to information, etc., etc. Right to discretion and confidentiality. Am I sure as a patient that all this information will be confidential? Am I sure that artificial intelligence system and medical practitioner who works within the artificial intelligence system in healthcare could provide this confidentiality? Right to respect to patients' time. Right to quality of service. Am I sure as a patient that the service has a good quality service? I'm speaking about the AI services in healthcare. Of course, we must find the balance between legal relations of artificial intelligence issues and data protection. Again, ethical issues and artificial intelligence in healthcare, and of course, the balance between relationships where we do have, from the one hand, let's say, AI-based devices in healthcare, and from the other hand, medical practitioners. Are they informed enough how does the process works? Are medical practitioners informed enough what kind of procedures may provide and what kind of decision could make this artificial intelligence device? And the use of artificial intelligence in healthcare will intersect with the law in several ways. And of course, there are questions about whether existing laws, I do understand national as well as international EU laws, will address identified concerns with health-related artificial intelligence. And then the questions whether medical device regulation, for instance, as we call it MDR regulation, medical multi-practice law, product liabilities law, and professional self-regulation and accreditation will adequately attend to the possibility or error of the part of artificial intelligence. Of course, we must ask this question at national level. Are we ready to provide this accreditation process? Are we ready to provide, let's say, product liabilities issues and regulation at national level, firstly? Whether existing rule concerning the attribution of liability for medical errors are they appropriate for when artificial intelligence tool recommends or even performs a course of harmful treatment, for instance? And of course, how liability should be attributed as between healthcare professionals and artificial intelligence system providers, manufacturers, developers. Whether existing anti-discrimination and human rights laws can attend to the problem of algorithmic bias, in which artificial intelligence tools inappropriately produce different kinds of outcomes for historical disadvantaged, let's say, groups. And whether existing privacy laws sufficiently protect patients given artificial intelligence big data needs. And again, my colleagues spoke about these big data issues. The next question is, of course, about the national policy documents, policy-making documents, and informed consent issue. And I spoke a little bit about informed consent from the AI perspective in healthcare issues. And in Latvia, actually, the issue of informed consent, where we use artificial intelligence system in healthcare, is most of interesting issue right now, because we do have a lot of questions from patients about this informed consent forms and content if the treatment made by artificial intelligence system, of course, together with a medical practitioner, because again, according to national law, medical practitioners do have liability according to national law, not artificial intelligence system. So the main key or key issues is the trust. The patient's trust to artificial intelligence in healthcare. And if patients do not have this trust, if the patients do not understand how does the system works, if the patients do not understand what kind of processes provided by artificial intelligence system in healthcare, there might be some disappointment and disadvantages in cooperation between medical practitioner and patients. And as I told you previously, but in my opinion, there are 4 issues, main issues from the ethical point of view in cooperation or coordination, cooperation between medical practitioner and patients. This is informed consent for sure, safety issues, algorithmic fairness and biases, and data privacy. So basically, we must find a way how make this national level regulation and find a balance between these ethical, legal issues, and of course, development processes in artificial intelligence. And if you speak about the legal point of view, I like this picture very much and I use it. And then my colleague published the article. I put some references to this article. So there are some legal issues and ethical issues and comparative analysis. And again, liability, decision-making process, governance, confidentiality, all these issues must be very carefully seen at national and of course international level. And if we speak about the legal challenges, this is safety, again liability, cybersecurity, intellectual property law, intellectual property, and all these issues are very actual and popular from the legal perspective as well. And of course, in my opinion, it's very important that all stakeholders, including artificial intelligence makers, including patients organizations and patients as a physical persons, healthcare professionals, hospitals, authorities, work together to identify these real practical challenges to ensure that artificial intelligence will be successfully implemented in a different way. Because as we know, we as theoretical persons, we usually read documents and we think that this is real problem. But again, we will work with patients, or when we work with medical practitioners, with hospitals, we see particular different picture, particular different problems. And then it's very important to put together this practical and theoretical part to identify the real issues. And if you speak about this liability issues, a part of ethical and as well as legal problematics, then I must say that new artificial intelligence-based technologies in healthcare, they make some challenges in this liability regime. And of course, it's very hard, but we must find a way how to make very optimal liability regime at national level and international or EU level. And there I would like to put your attention to civil law rules on robotics. EU Parliament resolution with recommendations to the Commission on Civil Law Rules in Robotics. And the resolution actually provided 2 approaches. And I totally agree with this approach. It's strict liability and risk management approach. And as my colleague told before, there are another legal documents, acts that are very important in the key or issue in healthcare sector. If we speak about artificial intelligence, and one of these acts, of course, medical device regulation. And still, yes, we do understand that we could, let's say, put attention to artificial intelligence system in healthcare and overview these problematical issues under the MDR regulation, but still, the lot of unclear information and unanswered questions. And of course, the next document is regulation on in vitro diagnostics in medical devices. Therefore, it still needs some time to understand how we can put AI systems in healthcare in particular documents. And of course, what I would like to say in the end, that Europe in general, of course, and we as a national representative, state representative, we're still not ready for new liability challenges in the issue of artificial intelligence in healthcare as well. Therefore, it's huge work for us to understand how we can put liability regimes at national and international level to make to ensure the best interests of the patients. So thank you so much. I tried to be very short.
Thank you, Karina, very much. I also agree and noted that trust is essential in such sensitive issue as healthcare, because of course, it is about the impact to health or even life, critical rights of a person, and what could be more helpful to increase that trust than strict liability regimes, of course. So maybe we'll get ready when the EU initiatives will be adopted in that area. So now I would like to continue with a related topic, with AI applications to reproductive choices and human rights. That would be presented by two academics. It's a work of two academics. So one is Professor Paulius Pakutinskas, professor and head of legal tech program at Mykolas Romeris University, and Alma Linkevičiūtė, that obtained her doctoral degree in Foundations of Life Sciences. So she in Milan, Italy, and she is a successful collaborator with ability to work across disciplines, and we'll see how these interrelated disciplines bring a beautiful result to us, because we talk now about AI, life sciences, and reproductive choices. So please take the stage.
Hello, it's nice to participate in this lovely meeting when we discuss a lot of issues. Looks like related and not related sometimes, and we were talking from war to health. And there were very interesting presentations where we were discussing some issues related to robots and to artificial intelligence, and that's important because artificial intelligence is based of these new things. And sometimes when we think about problems raised by artificial intelligence, we think about super artificial intelligence, but we know that narrow artificial intelligence can raise quite a lot of issues and problems, and not just as a robots, but we will touch one interesting issue when it will be possible to, let's call, adjust our kids to create them more perfect, to choose some color of eyes, skin, and etc., and how it correlate with the human rights and with the regulation. And as we discussed, the regulation is just in process. We have some good regulation like UNESCO artificial intelligence, but that's a recommendation. So it's mostly based on, as it was told numerous times, both ethics and legal regulation, sometimes strict regulation, could be introduced. So I think you will enjoy our presentation, and Alma, please.
Yes, thank you, Paulius, for nice introduction to our topic, and I will continue describing where artificial intelligence is used in reproductive decisions currently. And first of all, it's artificial reproductive technologies known as ART, and more specifically in vitro fertilization, used by IVF clinics worldwide for oocyte, sperm, and embryo selection based on its quality, and especially in embryos case, likelihood of implantation to the womb. However, these technologies, even though used widely and many fertility clinics advertise that they use AI-enhanced decisions and tools, predictions of IVF success or probability of live birth is more difficult to estimate because of multiple factors involved. And also technology bias can offer potential customers more trust. They think that AI is somehow more superior and will help to take decisions which just plain doctor's advice could not. However, it's important to note that there is very limited data from randomized clinical trials available on using AI in reproductive medicine, and such trials are not even possible if AI algorithms function under black box model. Another area where AI is used is so-called femtech market, which is expected to reach 50 billion market value just in a couple of years. They are marketed usually as well-being apps and mostly directed to women. They offer period tracking, fertility, contraception, conception tools. They can also work as diagnostic tools for some conditions, mostly affecting women. And as I mentioned, they are marketed very obscurely. And they also, even though they serve a medical purpose, and that's what many users expect, they qualify themselves as apps for well-being, and therefore they circumvent the EU regulation for medical devices, which would set stricter requirements. Furthermore, the discussion on AI being used in fertility has been ongoing, both in academic literature by all main journals in Europe and also the US, having a vast amount of articles, and also in the social and sphere by various activists raising concerns about data protection and possibility of surveillance, which especially came into light earlier this year when the US Supreme Court abolished the constitutional right to pregnancy termination in Roe versus Wade case. So how do human rights look in the light of AI-aided reproduction, and where we might encounter problems? Well, first of all, if we talk about AI, the definition of human itself can be debated, especially if we talk about pregnancy. Is fetus a human? And if it is, to what extent? And does it even matter for AI? And we would argue that it does. It's really important. Furthermore, as we heard in earlier presentations, there are a vast amount of human rights, what we consider as a human right, starting from some fundamental human rights on which more or less majority can agree, but some other rights which might be based on ideology, different sources, and there are also nuances. That's why we have human rights courts, where we sometimes have to go and clarify what it means and how it is applied, and if some human rights were violated. Just to give a couple of examples, for example, there might be a clash between right to privacy and right to healthcare. And we can see this if we compare the United States and some European countries, where United States do not have universal coverage and access to healthcare, why it is very important, and it's always stressed, the right to privacy. Also, what about right to self-determination and right to be protected from potential harms? Maybe the user would like to know all the choices, even if they are harmful to them, but they would still like to choose. So what should AI know about human rights and reproduction, and how it should prioritize human rights, how the conflicting rights should be mitigated? These are still open questions, still being debated, and well, we expect that that debate will continue for many more years to come, and possibly there won't be one universal global resolution. Furthermore, we already heard about bias in the data used to teach AI algorithms, algorithmic bias in programming, which can lead not only to an individual user, but also broader group discrimination. And it can start from what embryos get selected, when is the best time to bear children, and if such time is different for people from different social, ethnic, religious, and various other groups. And it has been shown already that inequality in various medical devices already exists. And it's not only based on physical features such as race and sex, but also socioeconomic status. Furthermore, it has been mentioned by other speakers lightly already that algorithmic creators' biases can also reinforce discrimination more broadly, and it is known from the academic literature and vast amount of research that healthcare professionals themselves have biases towards the reproductive decisions and might not provide the same advice to people with the same condition, but qualify it based on different characteristics of the patients. And furthermore, AI developers who provide AI tools are not usually specialists in the field for which they create technical solutions, such as medicine, education, and many other areas. And of course, personal data has been stressed a lot during today's presentations. In reproduction, it can be extremely sensitive because it's not only medical data, it can be very intimate, it can be genetic, and can, if not handled with care, can violate privacy rights. To continue on, the reproductive technologies and human rights clashes if we talk about embryo selection, violation to right to life, which of course discussion is very controversial and very much influenced by different ideologies and beliefs. However, if we select embryos, potential clashes even with disability rights can occur, and it can also lead to eugenics, as Paulius already mentioned. Also, bias and discrimination can be embedded in AI tools, and it can be, well, very difficult to determine where those biases are, and even such fundamental questions: should AI recommend how many children one should have and when? Shifting to femtech apps, we identify three broad areas where human rights can be violated. So first of all, it's privacy, as already mentioned, because of sensitivity of data, and also where such apps keep the data. They don't only collect and store it, they also use it and sell it for advertising. It can also clash with liberty to make our own decisions, users' own decisions, because it is known that there might be over-reliance on technologies, not only because of technology bias, but also for convenience and just being very comfortable with using an app, getting suggestions, getting advertisements which are relevant. And all this can lead even compromises to users' bodily integrity if using femtech apps, which are financed by various interest groups with strong ideological leaning. Also, there might be state surveillance in some more authoritarian states will nudges, for example, to have more children, especially in countries which suffer now the consequences of aging population. So what happens when we over-rely on technology and this technology fails? What is important to realize, not only for individual users, but also users of healthcare technologies which are working the support of AI tools, that such tools can be inaccurate. There might be algorithmic bias, and some suggestions might be unexplainable, and if followed to the letter can have dire consequences. Therefore, responsibilities for quality also are not always determined very clearly, because developers, creators, sellers and users of AI tools are different entities and responsibilities dispersed among many different parties, as well as complex AI systems can be difficult to really, when using them, it's difficult to establish where the error happened and who is responsible in that particular situation for that particular error. Also important to know, especially in well-being apps, that many users can perceive that these apps offer medical advice and they would use it without necessarily consulting doctors, mistakenly believing that it also protects their privacy because they don't go to the doctor to discuss very personal, intimate issues, and also perceive that enhance their autonomy because they have some AI tools to provide them information and take possibly more informed, better decisions. And such practices can lead to misconception, false health and lifestyle premises with unintended consequences, which could lead to, well, first of all, unwanted pregnancies, misdiagnosed medical conditions, also false assumption that it's not necessary to consult a doctor, and risky sexual behavior. So moving forward, we would like to have a look what we might have already being offered, being suggested in the European Union by the proposed Artificial Intelligence Act, which I have to stress, although most listeners probably know it very well, that it's still being debated and suggestions and changes are still being discussed. So in relation to reproduction, it's the core aspects to look at risks to health, safety, and fundamental rights, and possibly embryo selection tools might fluctuate between high risk and acceptable risk, depending on how such tools are used, whether they are diagnostic and prognostic, or whether they extend much further as customizing the children we would like to have, which could lead to eugenics. Furthermore, if it's regulated very strictly and maybe fluctuates to unacceptable risk, AI tools might require adjustment to regulatory requirements, but because there would be market needs, European Union market would not be competitive, and fertility businesses, fertility clinics would move to other jurisdictions where possibly regulation is less strict. Black box usage restrictions, as we mentioned, can cause a lot of problems, and it's not possible to explain the decisions. Transparency requirements are very important, but they can also limit the capabilities of the algorithm if we eliminate the black box. And human oversight, or human in the loop or on the loop, again, it's another requirement for high-risk systems, and in general, it's ethical requirement trying to be pushed on most AI tools by the ethicists. One of the core items is protection of human dignity. However, it's still quite debated because, at least in the EU legislation, it's human dignity usually relates to data protection. However, if talking about fertility and in general medical use of AI, human dignity can be perceived much more broadly than just data protection. Furthermore, Artificial Intelligence Act tends to prohibit manipulative systems. However, if we look at femtech apps, they can use nudges for healthy choices or giving options to consider the choices, that it is not likely to be restrictive because they might not immediately be seen as manipulative. And the same femtech apps can be used as platform to promote fertility clinic services, advertise them, suggest oocyte freezing for women to delay bearing children, IVF, surrogacy, and any other services which would be legal in that particular jurisdiction where the app is being used. And the last but not least, AI systems are required not to cause individual harm. That is the proposal in the Artificial Intelligence Act. However, it does not mention much about harm to particular groups, because collective harms might occur if data is collected by femtech apps and used by third parties. And user responsibilities are not also clearly elaborated and defined in Artificial Intelligence Act. What are users' responsibilities when they use AI tools? And to summarize our talk today, AI offers great opportunities for big data analytics, diagnostic and prediction in reproductive services. But nevertheless, it has been shown that AI-generated decisions can be impacted by various biases, leading to discrimination. And some tools have been shown to be inaccurate and not function well. Using AI to inform reproductive choices have a wide array of promises in artificial reproductive technologies when used in a clinic by experienced clinicians who are aware of AI limitations. However, it can still lead to consumer misconception due to technology bias. Furthermore, erroneous information on embryo viability can lead to compromised patient autonomy, bodily integrity, and trust in medical technologies and also medical profession as such. Biases in consumer healthcare apps can be discriminatory, promise free and autonomous choices by the users, and lead them to take reproductive decisions with unintended consequences, compromising the liberty to make their own decisions, their bodily integrity, and also privacy. And to conclude, harms caused by AI application to reproductive health decisions might not always be individual. Individual user might not experience them, but due to algorithmic bias and privacy breaches, collective harm might occur to like broader social group of people. And to finish, we would like to thank the funders who fund our research, that is the European Social Fund. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alma and Paulus, for your brilliant presentation and great insights and bringing attention to collective harm that was in some cases mentioned in earlier presentations, but bringing it in the context of such sensitive and also area that is also a bit a black box itself, meaning reproduction area. So I think that these insights will enrich knowledge of our participants in a very large scale. And being strict to time and following the time, I will continue with the presentation of my own. One moment, and I will present a topic on social and corporate governance. I hope that everything is visible. And so my topic today is artificial intelligence and environmental, social, and corporate governance, a new topic that is on the trends today. So how it's good, how it's bad, and how it's ugly. Just having a bit of background on the sustainable development itself, how and why it's regulated by international law. We know that there are 17 sustainable development goals and more than 100 targets that did not emerge from nowhere. They were actually grounded in international law because it's like a collection of existing international obligations of states in specific areas, in particular environmental, social, and governance areas. How it happened that how it happened that there was a global need to have such metrics and to collect them together. Of course, at first it was because of the climate change, and most of the world states signed the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Paris Agreement, then all UN member states adopted the Agenda for Sustainable Development that contains these Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look to the content of these goals, they are actually derived from the wording of certain international conventions that are signed by most of the states. As a sum, we see that it does not have value of regular international convention, neither the impact, but as a collection itself, it is a matter of international law, and it's very relevant. However, there are some issues that maybe it would be too early now to speak about that it contains an obligation erga omnes, understood as owed by whole of the international community as states, and that all states could invoke the violation and take enforcement measures, but the time will show. What's actually visible, that national regulation is not enough, because large corporations as such, they have global impact, they are acting globally, sometimes they have an impact to global policies that is more influential than of certain states. So it's absolutely natural that regulation has to be not limited to nation states. And moreover, these goals have to be realized in a coherent manner, because uneven development would violate some of the goals. For example, you cannot end hunger by using enormous number of fertilizers, as it would harm the environment, even if you would end the hunger. So how can artificial intelligence actually help? There are three ways to achieve these goals, and there are three outcomes, at least three outcomes that are most critical to it. One is about the system of human rights. If we see the framework that is contained in the Sustainable Development Goals, we see that somehow these goals are very loosely connected together, and there is no internal hierarchy to balance these different Sustainable Development Goals. And when we look at the machine and machine learning or other artificial intelligence technologies, that means that even if AI is very powerful and can work on both structured data, unstructured data, visual, textual, and numerical data, even if they can combine different domains and ignore language barriers, even if they can make analysis, forecasts, or perform repetitive tasks, in some cases it still requires a rule book to not to pick the ways of certain values by itself, but to pick it as we want the AI to do. Why it's important? Because if we allow the AI to act independently and autonomously, that would obviously end in certain customary practice that's not learning from higher values that are usually not written directly. They are inside the text, but they cannot be extracted as numerical data or certain entities. So the AI loses that connection of legal value. But if it would have a rule book to balance between different social development goals, then the promise would be, the AI promise would be more realistic. A second thing that's also very important, that there is no single universal standard that should apply for all states and for all companies. There are many of them. It's so-called alphabet soup because sustainable development goals, they are formulated very broadly. The other ones are more specific but dedicated to certain areas, and they do not cover all of the things. So when we want to make AI work, we have to have clear benchmarking to see how would we measure success and failure. So then we have unclear standards, and many of them, and broadly formulated goals. Then it will end in legal uncertainty by itself, and it's not the fault of AI. The other aspect is about the mode how AI operates. Here we have three pillars: environment, social, and corporate governance. And these three pillars are described by different data. Normally, environment as such is that kind of domain that is easily described by numerical data. We can easily calculate such things as waste, how much waste do we produce. Then we can easily in numbers calculate how much electricity is being used, and so on and so on. So it is quite easy for the AI to count and to make predictions because these are numbers. Moreover, if we look at the output of the AI, it basically means that the predictions in that area are not of high risk usually, because they form kind of blurred vision how they should be used, because one company may be a large polluter, but what's its impact to global warming as itself? So basically we see the numbers, but the prediction itself are of low risk. But if we look into other pillars such as social and governance, they are better described by textual data. And even if AI has demonstrated that it is quite equally successful to work with unstructured data, and let's say it extracts certain named entities from health records and so on, and make the same prediction as of the data that is extracted from templates and questionnaires. but still the outcome is usually of high risk because it involves individuals and not a collective harm. And when individual is involved, then all the predictions, they have to be very precise, because in other case, it would mean that risk is too high for the objective that is to be achieved. So I have some certain examples how AI calculated ESG ratings were to be used and to mislead the users, and I will explain how it happened. One of the examples that was high on the media was Boohoo practice. It's a fashion retailer that had perfect ESG ratings that were calculated by artificial intelligence. It means that investors, when making their decisions upon investing, were perfectly sure that everything is okay with that company, both in the environmental area, social and corporate governance area. But what happened after that, the media got some news and published an article that there are certain reflections of modern slavery in this company, and after the negative publications in media, reputation went down, and ESG AI providers then had to make arguments why the ESG ratings were perfect, and why they did not pay attention to certain red flags that can happen in a workplace. So basically, it was a rule that no incidents at workplace means a good rating. Even if we had audits, let's say, on place, it would mean that some kind of unacceptable behavior would be noticed then. So for the AI, they just had a rule, an autonomous rule, that no incidents means it's a good rating, even if it's not. Another example is with the Wirecard that got medium ratings calculated by the artificial intelligence for 5 years, even if media was translating for 5 years that some bad practices, corrupt practices can be present in that company. And after it went bankrupt because 1.9 billion cash corruption scandal broke out. After that, AI providers explained that, yes, there was one bad indicator that was regularly bad. It was about the governments, but it was outweighed by 19 good indicators, and that meant that the end result is good. The other aspect that arises from the AI application in ESG area is the liability and responsibility rules that are today under reform in the European Union. So I will not talk much about the specific rules that are proposed, but what's common between these two reforms is that at both times, equal footing at both sides is proposed, that corporations as such as having a large impact to global policy has to take on responsibility as at least more than they do now. And the other reform is about giving consumers more rights in the redress procedures, because of a black box effect and because of the lack of the awareness that is now, and it's absolutely normal. So what kind of new things were introduced? So one thing is that it's not only about companies, it's also about directors that have a duty to care when making due diligence procedures. Then we have new thing, rebuttable presumptions of causality, defectiveness, duty of care again in redress procedures when we talk about AI liability. And we have fault liability and strict liability as options for individuals to have at redress. So what are the problematic areas in it? One thing is that ESG due diligence is not intended for all companies. So basically, the option was that we will cover largest corporations that have the largest impact on environmental, social, and governance area, and then small and medium enterprises will follow after a good example of the large corporations. But it's really a questionable thing. Will it work then? Because for now it covers 14,000 of companies within the European Union. If it will be a responsibility just of the large companies, it may not work correctly, as bad practices may continue to happen for a longer time than we are willing to give. Another thing is about the question about ESG data variety, velocity, and volume in AI apps. If there are questionable things how to divide the liability, if a special decision was made, preference was made based on AI recommendation, and it was a bad decision, and it partly depended on the third parties that do not provide the data, because, as you know, most of the ESG data, they are scraped from a public domain and not based on contracts with specific legal persons. So basically, they are not obliged to provide that data. Usually, a huge amount of data is necessary, velocity is necessary, volume is necessary, and we don't have any guarantees that it would be a correct prediction. With human error, there are differences. How can and questions? How can we decide and where to bring a red line? What was the human error due to the lack of system transparency or lack of human competence? Because as it was already noted in previous presentations, users as such, they lack information in a simple form how AI is operating, and it is a big barrier for them to have redress if rights were violated. So basically, even if the AI provider will provide information as it is how AI app works and how it makes decisions, it may be too technical and not enough understandable for a regular user, because AI systems are really very complicated ones. And the other aspect is the cost of transparency duty that will be required by the new directives. If you are transparent about how AI works, it makes it easier for misusers of the system to fake good ECG. What do I mean? For example, an AI app that calculates ESG ratings from the mission statements of the companies. Sometimes the missions statements of the companies are written uniquely, but in some cases we are just copied like a template. And if you know that, let's say, AI reacts to certain trigger words, it means, and it will raise your ESG rating, it means that you will market yourself and greenwash yourself, even if you are not so good in ESG. An example of how misuse can happen if we have certain bad preferences of AI providers. It's a leading AI provider in insurance technologies, Lemonade, that is quite oftenly cited because of its open policy and towards AI and how it works. So the statements of that company include statements that our insurance cost is calculated automatically based on behavior of users. So the costs, fire insurance costs for Jews should be higher, because Jews they have menorahs, and because it is a ground to say that they are more prone to make fires because of their religious practices, even if it's not necessarily so. The other practice of this company was that you don't have to fill the form for your insurance. If something happened, just make a video telling us about how it happened and send us. So this video then is analyzed for non-verbal clues of fraud, and after that AI as such makes predictions if you are a wrongdoer or not. So if you have to pay insurance or not for that person. So basically makes a decision based on your behavior, how you tell your story. And the third thing, not to keep you long, it's prediction of ESG-related incidents by AI. And it was actually a very long saying that you cannot predict black swan events. They are unpredictable, but all swans seem to be black at night. And with the AI promise, we can bring more light and to predict more incidents that could happen in the future. And if even if we fail to do that, we can then ensure a great visibility and comparability of processes, and then we have a chance to mitigate the effects of black swans, even if they happened. So that would also mean that the state's obligation to prevent human rights violation as such is being widened, and then that the states should take proactive steps to prevent such harm. So here you see in the picture how the incidence of certain events can be predicted. In the left sides, you see attacks against civilians that happened, and if it was understood as successful, then it followed a new one. So such kind of things can be predicted, but certain overlap of specific circumstances that erupt without precedents, they are quite difficult to be predicted because they don't follow statistical laws, and you cannot expect that normally it could happen so. But still, if you see that something happened and AI learned from itself, the second incident would not be considered as black swan then. All the later swans would be white then. So to summarize, the use of ESG AI system is well balanced for environmental rights. However, social and corporate governance and the AI systems working in that area require additional safeguards because of the nature of the AI and how it works. Then the second thing, that lack of internal alignment between social development goals may lead into human rights violations, and then as we have non-specific balance tests for these frameworks, of course, it would be obvious that standard balance tests used in the practice of European Court of Human Rights or the EU courts, that they may be employed with human supervision. And then that the AI-related liability and responsibility rules, that they ensure different options of access to justice, but we still have black box effect of AI that's a bit mitigated by rebuttable presumptions that are introduced in the new EU initiatives on liability of AI, but it's not enough, as users itself, they lack awareness of how AI operates, and that may hinder the efficiency of legal remedies and redress. So that's what I wanted to talk about ESG, and I see I've already over my time. So one moment, I will switch it on. So, so I would like to thank all of you for coming to today's conference. We've covered actually various aspects of artificial intelligence, including international humanitarian law, healthcare, media, surveillance, sustainability, privacy, regulators initiatives. And I would like to thank all the speakers and guests and our participants for knowledge-loaded presentations and your interest in this particularly important field, and of course for having 3 hours of precious time dedicated for this conference. From the practical side, I will send summary of the conference and link to recording in several days after the conference. So thank you again. I hope to see you in other conferences on artificial intelligence and human rights. And I wish you to have a productive Friday, rest of it. Thank you very much. Bye.